Good morning, everyone. Sorry, I just need to turn off the speaker here. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for those of you in the room and those joining us online as well. We have today the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, who will be delivering some opening remarks to you for about 15 minutes, and then we'll open the floor to questions. High Commissioner, please.
Yes. Yes, now you can see. Good morning. It's good to see so many of you here today. In just over a year as High Commissioner for Human Rights, I have met during my many travels with people from numerous countries. In fact, across all continents, including those in the midst of major crises. I've also talked to civil society actors from many other parts of the world that I have not been able to visit. Across each and every country, I heard and witnessed the universal desire for human rights to be respected and protected. I heard it from young women in Khartoum taking to the streets to drum up participation in protest rallies demanding their voice to be heard in government. I heard it from a human rights defender working on environmental rights in the marshes of southern Iraq. From indigenous peoples, representatives in Ecuador, Canada, Norway and Sweden. From people of African descent in the US and Colombia. From civil society in countries at war, deeply worried about the impact of the violence on human rights, but also about what kind of society will emerge the day after. In many of my interactions with people, I'm also asked, given the pervasive conflicts and coups, climate change and other crises, have human rights failed? No, human rights have not failed. It is the cynical disregard for human rights and the failure to respect and heed warnings on human rights that has got us here. The conflicts and crises stalking us today should be wake-up calls for the international community. A wake-up call that when human rights are violated or sidelined, conflicts erupt. A wake-up call that failure to respect human rights results in instability, suffering, more inequalities and economic crisis. A wake-up call that when human rights defenders and my office, the UN Human Rights Office, ring alarm bells, you must listen and you must act to prevent violations. Human rights must be at the center of governance, not just beautiful speeches by high-level officials. They must be in policies and laws and guide how these laws and policies are implemented, the nuts and bolts of human rights work. They must be the common thread running through all aspects of governance, economy and society. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was crafted with lessons drawn from two global wars, the Holocaust, atomic destruction, profound economic devastation, and generations of colonial exploitation, oppression, injustice and bloodshed. It was conceived as a roadmap to a more stable, more just world. Human rights are inherent to every human being. Leaders who ignore this truth imperil the people they are meant to serve. Unfortunately, leaders in many parts of the world would have done just this. As a result, we are seeing violent conflict increase and intensify across the globe. 2 months after the horrific attacks on Israel on the 7th and 8th of October by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups, in which civilians were directly targeted and hostages taken, civilians in Gaza continue to be relentlessly bombarded by Israel and collectively punished, suffering death, siege, destruction and deprivation of the most essential human needs, such as food, water, life-saving medical supplies and other essentials on a massive scale. Palestinians in Gaza are living in utter, deepening horror. Military operations, including bombardments, by Israeli forces continue in North, Middle and South Gaza, affecting people who have already been displaced multiple times, forced to flee in search of safety. But no place is safe. As we speak, some 1.9 million out of the 2.2 million Palestinians have been displaced and are being pushed into ever-diminishing and extremely overcrowded places in southern Gaza in unsanitary and unhealthy conditions. And humanitarian aid is again virtually cut off as fears of widespread disease and hunger spread. The catastrophic situation we see unfolding in the Gaza Strip was entirely foreseeable and preventable. My humanitarian colleagues have described the situation as apocalyptic. In these circumstances, there is a heightened risk of atrocity crimes. Measures need to be taken urgently, both by the parties concerned and by all states, particularly those with influence, to prevent any such crimes. The international community needs to insist with one voice on a ceasefire immediately on human rights and humanitarian grounds. The human rights crisis in the occupied West Bank, including East Jerusalem, is also extremely alarming, including an increase in unnecessary or disproportionate, even militarized use of force by Israeli forces, resulting in a rise in unlawful killings, much more aggressive and frequent settler violence leading to the forced displacement of Palestinian communities, record increases in arbitrary arrests and detention, an alarming spike in deaths in custody, and allegations of ill treatment of Palestinians in detention, including sexual violence. The Israeli authorities must take immediate steps to end widespread impunity for such violations. As the catastrophic consequences for civilians in Gaza mount, I want to again express my grave concern regarding dehumanizing and insightful statements made by current and former high-level Israeli officials as well as Hamas figures. History has shown us where this kind of language can lead. This is not just unacceptable, but a competent court may view such statements in the circumstances in which they are made an incitement to atrocity crimes. As more information emerges on serious allegations of sexual violence perpetrated by members of armed Palestinian groups, including Hamas, during their attacks on 7 and 8 October, it is painfully clear that these attacks need to be fully investigated to ensure justice for the victims. It is crucial that there are rigorous investigations and accountability for all breaches of international human rights and humanitarian law. Individual criminal responsibility must be established. As an immediate step, I call for an urgent cessation of hostilities and the release of all hostages. All parties are aware of what is really needed to achieve peace and security for Palestinians and Israelis. Violence and vengeance can only result in more hatred and radicalization. The only way to end the accumulative sufferings is ending the occupation and achieving the two-state solution. In Myanmar, the human rights crisis caused by the military continues to inflict an unbearable toll on civilians. To date, credible sources have verified that military forces have killed over 4,232 civilians since the coup. Civilians have suffered countless violations, facing airstrikes, artillery shelling, enforced disappearances, arbitrary arrests and prosecutions, as well as sexual violence, displacement, denial of humanitarian assistance, and the burning of their homes, fields and villages. The situation of the Rohingya Muslim community is ever more protracted, with no prospect for safe and sustainable return. Many are taking to dangerous journeys in the region by sea. The Myanmar military has lost critical ground since the end of October as a result of coordinated attacks by ethnic armed organizations and anti-military armed groups. Civilian casualties and internal displacement have been rising at a rapid rate. Now as ever, it is necessary that all parties ensure that the civilian population is adequately protected. There must be intensified efforts by the international community for an end to the violence and the peaceful restoration of an inclusive and representative government. In Sudan, the conflict between the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces rages with significant risk of a protracted civil war and fragmentation of the country. More than 7,000 civilians, including women and children, have been killed since April 2023, and 6.3 million displaced. Half the population is in need of assistance. We have documentation of rape being used as a weapon of war, particularly by RSF and affiliated forces. Ethnic and racial tensions are being stoked, and there is a general breakdown of the rule of law across Sudan. Neither party to the conflict has sought to address seriously the conduct of their own forces. So both parties, and I call on them again, must ensure that all personnel that is responsible for violations of international humanitarian law and human rights law are held accountable. In Ukraine, more than 10,000 civilians have now been verified killed since the Russian invasion into Ukraine territory on the 24th of February 2022. The actual death toll may be significantly higher. Ukrainians living in territory occupied by the Russian Federation encounter appalling restrictions on their fundamental rights and freedoms. This protracted, destructive war must be brought to an end. Unconstitutional changes in government, including military coups in Burkina Faso, in Chad, in Guinea, in Mali, in Niger, have significantly weakened human rights protections and the rule of law in these countries. It is vital that the transitional authorities commit and adhere to timelines towards a return to democratic rule and take effective steps to protect human rights during that process. I'm also following with growing concern the political crises in countries like Guatemala, Peru, and Nicaragua, and their impact on human rights. In Guatemala, I'm particularly alarmed at continued and systematic attempts, in particular by the Attorney General's office, to undermine the outcome of the general elections that were held in June and August this year. I urge all Guatemalan authorities to refrain from any further attempt to challenge the election results and to ensure that all human rights, including the rights to freedom of peaceful assembly and expression, are fully respected. The will of the majority of the Guatemalan people must prevail and democracy safeguarded with the support of the international community. In the coming year, elections are scheduled to take place in more than 70 countries, covering half of the world's population. In the pre-electoral period, it is particularly important to ensure that the right to freedom of expression, peaceful assembly, association, and political participation are fully respected. Unfortunately, pre-electoral periods are often fertile ground for extremism, stoking of fears, hate-filled rhetoric, and the politics of division, distraction, and deception. I urge political and other leaders to refrain from sowing fear of the other, creating divisions, and instrumentalizing differences to win votes. These elections will be among the first in the era of widely available generative artificial intelligence. There are obvious risks of unusually powerful propaganda and disinformation being produced at scale by a growing assortment of actors. It will be more important than ever to ensure that states and technology companies can respond to online harmful content in a way that upholds our rights to information, our right to debate openly and freely, and which also uses human rights as a guide to address harmful speech that discriminates and incites to violence. Over the past 2 months, there has been a sharp rise in hate speech, both online and offline, in particular anti-Semitism and anti-Muslim bigotry. Homes and religious buildings around the globe have been defaced to frighten and provoke hate. Political leaders have also used inflammatory, toxic and hateful rhetoric. This must be vigorously condemned, and international human rights law is absolutely clear on this. Also unacceptable is the vilification of human rights defenders, including civil society actors, UN independent experts, UN officials and others, who speak about rights violations. I urge states to engage on the substance of allegations rather than unjustly attempting to discredit the messenger. At COP28, my office is joining others to press for more action to address the climate crisis and secure the right to a clean, healthy and sustainable environment. I am worried that those trying to highlight the harmful impact of climate change and the need to act now may be drowned out by powerful voices who have, at best, mixed agendas, including in support of the continued use of fossil fuels. Fulfilling the rights to life and a healthy environment requires the equitable phase-out of fossil fuels, and we know that human rights law requires that those responsible for climate harms, including states and businesses, to be held accountable for remedying them. It is time that we ensure that environmental destruction carries criminal sanctions as an essential deterrent. The future of our planet and our generations to come are at stake, and it is essential that the voices of civil society representatives are heard loud and clear in crafting actionable solutions. At this somber moment in history, I look forward to hosting next week on the 11th and the 12th of December a high-level event marking the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, to take stock of where we are, how we got here, what lessons to be learned, and what can we do to craft a better future for all human beings, no matter where and no matter who. Thank you.
Thank you, High Commissioner. We will be sending the High Commissioner's opening remarks by email to you all shortly. A reminder as well that this time we have simultaneous interpretation into French and Arabic. The High Commissioner will have to respond to all questions in English, but they will be translated into French and Arabic because of the arrangements with the interpreters. So we'll start with questions from the room. We'll take two at a time in order to get as many in as possible. We'll start in the front row here, please. Stéphane, and then Laurent and...
Thank you. Thank you, High Commissioner, for this briefing. As you said, we're days away from the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. You drew a very dark pictures of human rights in the current conflicts. How do you see the UN trying to bridge the gap and to restore some kind of universality of human rights, since universality is under assault from different parts? Thank you.
Laurent, please.
Yeah, thank you for the press conference. A question on both Gaza and the Palestinian detainees that were freed. On one side, now the U.S. say that the truce was not extended because there were sexual violences against some of the hostages, and on the other side, the Palestinians detainees that were freed said that they were increasingly beaten since October the 7th before being freed. So what do you know about both the situations, and what kind of appeal you want to launch in relation with that? Thank you.
High Commissioner, we'll do two at a time if that's
Yes, no, that's... Look, I mean, it is true that I have painted a very somber picture because we are in a time of incredible crisis. I mean, 55 conflicts. We haven't had so many for a very long time, probably since the end of the the Second World War. Plus, we have about a quarter of humanity now living in extremely dire, precarious situations affected by violence and conflict. And I've only just highlighted a few situations. I didn't even highlight Haiti, the deteriorating situation in Syria, for example, Afghanistan, and so forth. I mean, we could go on. It is true also that it was in the wake of the cataclysmic events of the two world wars, of what happened including in Europe, with the Holocaust, with atrocious human rights violations, that there was among the political leadership the hope to, and this never again sentiment that was very strong. And that never again sentiment led to the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it paved the way for the world to come out of misery, inequalities, of conflict. And I think precisely at a time when we see so many challenges, we need to remember that, and we need to see it as the measure against which to look at things and to look at developments. If we did not have it, we would be even in a more serious situation, because then you would have different standards. And let's also be very clear, it is the universal standard. I know that I sometimes hear it that some say, well, it doesn't apply in our religion, in our culture, it doesn't apply in our region. Well, actually, that's absolute nonsense, because this has been negotiated for years. We know that the Universal Declaration, but also the Vienna Declaration and Programme of Action, have been painstakingly negotiated by all countries. It inspired the decolonization movement, it inspired the anti-apartheid movement, and it inspired freedom fighters all around the world, be it on gender issues, be it on LGBTIQ plus issues, be it on race against racism. So we need to honor the achievements and the successes. We need to look at the failures, and we need to learn from them. So it's a deep moment of reflection for us, so that we do better in the future. And if I have one message, it's to make sure that the centrality of human rights is seen as something that is taken much more seriously by everyone. Look, first of all, if you look at the situation at the moment in Gaza, where you have a combination of multiple displacement, combination of ongoing conduct of hostilities, including the use of explosive weapons with wide area effect in extremely densely populated areas, where you have an ongoing, well, I can't even describe it. I don't know a word which says more than precarious. I mean, the humanitarian situation is catastrophic, cataclysmic, whatever word you want to find, it's undescribable. In a situation like this, the only way to get out of it is to say to all who have any influence over the two parties or the various parties to stop and call for, I mean, not only call for, actually cease hostilities, because you need to come back to your senses. You need to see what can be done. And you need to finally get the humanitarian aid in that is so desperately needed. I mean, you saw Martin Griffiths, the emergency relief coordinator, yesterday talking about an apocalyptic situation. I think the world needs to wake up to this.
Thank you. Sorry, Laurent, we've got a lot of questions. Nina and then Catherine.
Thank you very much for taking my question. Activists have accused the UN and international groups of maintaining a conspiracy of silence on the alleged rapes and other sexual crimes committed by Hamas militants during the October 7th attacks. And I don't think I've seen too much from your office on that as well. So I was wondering, are you investigating this specifically, and do you have information indicating the level of sexual violence committed that day? Thank you.
As I said also in my statement, we have now, I mean, it's last week that I met someone who, in fact, showed me or recorded to me a number of issues that raise very, very serious concerns about possible sexual violence having been committed by Hamas and other Palestinian armed groups. And of course, this has to be taken very seriously. I have asked the Israeli authorities in the first week of October, or in the second week of October after the 7-8 October events, to deploy a team, my team, to monitor, document, investigate the issues of the horrific attacks on Israelis. I've repeated this call, and I hope it will be heeded. But so far, I haven't received a response. It is clear atrocious forms of sexual violence need to be thoroughly investigated, and we need to make sure that justice is served, because that's what we owe the victims.
Catherine, and then Jamil.
Yes, good morning, sir. Thank you for being with us this morning. I'll go back to Gaza, Israel, but regarding journalists. journalists have been openly targeted by the Israeli army, not only in the OPTs, but also in Lebanon. Casualties are reaching more than 60 of our colleagues that have been killed. Is your team or one of your teams monitoring those deaths? And what is your call about targeting civilians that are just doing their jobs? Thank you.
Jamil?
Yes, sir. Jamil Shade from UOL in Brazil. You mentioned fossil fuel in COP28. Despite some reduction in deforestation in the Amazon, President Lula has the plan to explore oil in the Amazon. What is your message in that case specifically? Thank you.
Look, on the first one, yes, we are, to the extent possible, monitoring and trying to document, while we have an ongoing conflict situation, of all civilian deaths. In fact, we have just managed to verify a number of casualties. We will come out with the numbers that, according to our own methodology, and of course this includes also journalists and people and professionals. I mean, it's absolutely clear when it comes to journalists. We have a whole strategy, and together with UNESCO, to work on the protection and safety of journalists, and we keep making that point time and again. And we really call on everyone to respect the safety and protection needs that journalists have, and that's absolutely critical. When it comes to civilians more generally, I mean, you saw that we have lost colleagues within of the United Nations as well. So that's an extremely serious matter, and one that preoccupies us enormously, because we have never had in any situation so many colleagues killed within such a short time frame within one conflict situation, and that's obviously very, very, very dangerous. Look, on the fossil fuels, I mean, the world knows what needs to happen, right? I mean, we know that the targets at the moment, we are on a trajectory that by the end of this century, if it continues as business as usual, we will have an increase of 3 degrees centigrade. I mean, we don't even know. I mean, no one, I mean, there may be some who know more about it, but any modeling of strategic foresight of the tipping points that it would bring about are, again, beyond apocalyptic. It's a dystopian future, because it would mean the increase in sea level and water levels around the world to a degree that some of what we know now as habitable would no longer be habitable. We know that it would lead to massive displacement. It would lead to massive competition over scarce resources. We already see this happening if you look at the Sahel region, for example, but even my own situation when I went to Iraq, I could see the tensions. But it also means that we need, an equitable ending to fossil fuel use and exploitation. I think if there is a call to be made, it's just keep the fossil fuels under earth and find alternatives as quickly as you can, because fossil fuels have been bringing us to the brink of, or can bring us, if it's continued to happen, to the brink of extinction.
Mohammed, and then Gabriela.
Yes. Thank you so much, sir, for the briefing. Last night, Israeli Foreign Minister Cohen wrote on X platform, "We will no longer be silent in the face of the bias of the United Nations, and I decided to revoke the residence visa to Israel of the United Nations humanitarian coordinator Hastings." I was wondering, what would you like to say about his comment about the United Nations and his step against the United Nations staff person? Thank you.
Thanks, Mohammed. Gabriela?
Yes, thank you, High Commissioner. Gabriela Sotomayor, Mexico. Only one question?
can we ask? Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Because I can ask too. Okay. What is your assessment of the human rights situation in Mexico in the last 5 years, especially if you could tell us about the points that concerns you the most? Thank you very much. And thank you for being here.
Look, on the resident coordinator and humanitarian coordinator, Lynn Hastings, I've known her personally for many years. I have the highest professional regard for her. I have seen the vilification against her, and I have seen also the amount of disinformation that is spreading, and I find it unacceptable. On Mexico, I mean, it's obviously to look at one particular country situation. I mean, we have of course seen, I have to say, progress when it comes to reduction of poverty, improving of social welfare. Just to look at, I have some statistics here from my colleagues, with over 5 million people escaping poverty between 2018 and 2022. But it's also clear that challenges remain, and it's about the recognition that actually Mexico has recognized that there is a crisis of enforced disappearances. I had a chance also to talk to the Committee on Enforced Disappearances. As you probably know, they conducted a visit to it, and there are efforts to address the situation. But we also know that further progress is needed, because the issue of disappearances is a very serious concern, especially for the family members and for the society as a whole, because it creates a feeling of fear. And there are very strong recommendations that came from the committee, and I really hope that they can be implemented as quickly as possible. In fact, and then I looked at a number of ongoing concerns, especially violence against journalists. I mean, we mentioned journalists before. There is, in fact, between January 2019 and September 23, my office was able to document the killing of 41 journalists, 6 media workers, and 5 disappeared journalists. So this is obviously very serious. I know that there is an initiative, De Frente a la Libertad, which is important, which also counters the vilification that we have seen, and again, incredibly important as we go through. I think it's also very critical to ensure, when it comes to human mobility issues, and I myself in a previous life was several times in Mexico, that there is stronger recognition of what is happening internally when it comes to displacement, but also to build up the protection structures needed for refugees who come in particular from countries from the northern part of Central America. Thank you.
We have Nick with the New York Times and Yuri with RIA Novosti. Yes, you're on the list.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you for the press conference. I wonder if you think states with influence over Israel, and that means particularly the United States, have used that influence effectively in upholding commitments to international humanitarian law in this conflict? Or do you also share concerns that double standards are very much in evidence, and do you think that there is a price to be paid in terms of adherence to the standards of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights?
Yuri, please.
Yes, thank you for taking my question. You can't hear me? You can hear me now? Okay, yes, sorry. Thank you for this briefing. You are talking about the fact that you need some investigations in Gaza, in West Bank, in Israel, but we all know that Israel is not allowing your office to work there. Even they didn't give you a visa the last time that you asked for it. So don't you think that this is showing the limit of the UN if nobody can verify and investigate the war crimes that are committed right now in Gaza, when we are now seeing a lot of casualties, and especially children's, way more than in even conflicts that we had the past time. Thank you.
Look, it's clear that when it comes to a conflict, any conflict really, that there is a particular responsibility for countries who are not party to the conflict, but who have influence over the warring parties to use that influence to ensure that there is compliance with international humanitarian law and international human rights law. And that is an expectation from all the state parties to these instruments, because it's a common trust. It's something that we cannot avoid, because even if you're not directly involved in the conduct of hostilities. So I hope that in the discussions that are taking place, and I can only deduct this from media reports that I've seen, that indeed there are discussions about the absolute need for compliance with IHL and international human rights law standards. Do I wish this to be stronger? Of course. We want this to be absolutely clear, and we want this to be part of a robust discussion. Because we also see the consequences. I mean, the combination of factors that I described earlier are such that raise the highest levels of alarm. And there is then an obligation, even more so, for states with influence to exercise that influence robustly. When it comes to what you also mentioned in terms of double standards, when it comes to us in the UN, we don't apply these double standards because we have a non-selectivity approach. And I can tell you, whenever it comes to any of these type of violations, we are very clear about what they constitute, what more we need to do, and how we document them. And it is, of course, much more difficult when you have an active, ongoing war happening. It is easier if, the dust settles and you can actually start your investigative work, as, for instance, we could do in Ukraine, for example. I mean, it took us about 9 months to come up with our first report on what happened in Bucha, for example. Just to give you also the comparison. I mean, it's important for us to do according to our very rigorous methodology to do this type of work. And of course, this is much more difficult now because you have an ongoing war and you have contested narratives. As a result, again, much more important that there are independent investigations and they are taken seriously. Look, on accountability and investigations, yes, there are limits at the moment, but at the same time, as you can see, there are ongoing investigations by the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court. You have the Commission of Inquiry that is looking into both what was happening in Israel as well as in Gaza. You have my own office that tries to do its best, including through its remote work. And there is universal jurisdiction, because I believe that one of the missing links has always been that impunity reigns and accountability is not served. And I hope with a combination of these different accountability mechanisms that impunity ends, and we all need to work towards it. There will always be temporary setbacks. There will always be lack of cooperation by some. But we have also seen situations elsewhere where suddenly that cooperation starts, or where you are actually able to do the type of job that you need to do, and then we can do it. So you can never be sure to escape justice.
Thank you, High Commissioner. Now we have Taha and Imogen, and then we've got John, Yandirk, and Gunilla online. I'm afraid we will have to end after that. We'll see if we can take a follow-up question or two, but I'm not convinced we will manage. Taha, please.
Yes. We have noticed that United Nations is not doing enough regarding ongoing conflict in Sudan, in Darfur, as well in Gaza. There are serious violations, atrocities. What have you done and what you are going to do? I mean, do you have action plan to stop what is going on in Sudan and in Gaza?
Imogen?
Yeah, it's back to Gaza. The women who came to you with reports of sexual violence want you and the UN to condemn this unreservedly. That's where some of the tension is coming from. Can you do that?
On Sudan, my office, as you probably know, it was my first mission when I took over as High Commissioner because I wanted to pay particular attention to the situation in Sudan. It was in November last year, so it was obviously before the current crisis. We have followed it very, very closely. I have a presence, quite a big presence. I used to have quite a big presence. Now we are unfortunately only doing it out of Port Sudan with some colleagues, but we have continued working both out of Nairobi and in neighboring countries to actually interview those who fled the circumstances, especially in Darfur, but also in other parts of Sudan. And we have, as a result, been able to provide regular reporting on what is happening, which is also why I was very clear today on the type of crimes, on the type of violations that we have seen, in particular the very serious allegations of rape by RSF and affiliated troops. Again, the issue is accountability. In Sudan, accountability was the missing link. And I really hope that both when it comes to ICC investigations that are also ongoing in relation to Sudan, but also when it comes to universal jurisdiction, that accountability is served and needs to be served, and we will do whatever we can to continue monitoring, documenting and reporting the situation. I did not meet with women who are survivors of sexual violence. I met with an academic who informed me about some of the things that, and that was only last week. It is clear, and I can only say it again, we owe it to the victims that there are serious investigations of any of such allegations and that justice is served. And of course, the sexual violence, there is a very long-standing practice of condemning sexual violence, but it is also important for us to be able to investigate these allegations.
Right, we've got John, Yandirk, and Gunilla on the platform. If I can take 3 questions this time so we can move fast. John, please.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, High Commissioner. I was wondering, sir, if you have any comment on the latest data from the World Health Organization. There have been 499 attacks on health in the OPT and 60 attacks on health in Israel in the last 2 months of this conflict. And also if you have any views on the more than 130 UN personnel that have been killed in this conflict. Thank you.
Yandirk? Yandirk Heberman? We can't hear you.
Oh, can't hear me.
Yes, we hear you now.
Now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, many thanks. High Commissioner, I would like to ask you to elaborate a little bit more on next week's high-level meeting in Geneva. What do you expect from this meeting beyond nice and carefully drafted speeches? Many thanks.
Thanks for that. And Gunilla.
Yes, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, good.
Look, my question is similar to Nina Imogen. It's actually on rape as a weapon of war. How, and the war in Gaza and Israel, how concerned are you that this has been used widespread and even as a premeditated strategy in the conflict? And what do you say to the criticism from Israel that the UN has been slow in the response to accounts of Hamas militants raping women? Thanks.
Look, first of all, it is, and I think I may have said something incorrectly before, it is 130, the number of colleagues killed in Gaza is 130. So it's important to get the figure, which is a shocking number. And you can imagine what this means, including, by the way, I also have a lot of our own staff who keep telling us that their family members have been killed. Some of them live, they have all become victims in Gaza themselves. So it is obviously an extremely worrying and troubling situation for our staff and the security of our own staff, which is really unprecedented. It comes to the hospitals. I mean, we have, I mean, because of course under international humanitarian law, these are protected this is protected civilian infrastructure. And we have seen a number of cases where there have been airstrikes on schools, on hospitals or medical facilities, refugee camps, and we have serious concerns about the proportionality of these attacks, which, you know, there are the principles of necessity, distinction, precaution, and proportionality, and they need to be looked at very vigorously whether they were properly applied in these cases. But if you look at the number of civilians, you have a lot of, obviously it raises huge concerns and very serious and very serious areas. And especially if you look in particular at the fatality rate. I mean, we have, according to the Gaza Ministry of Health, 16,000 Palestinians killed, including 6,150 children, more than 4,000 women. And our own office has done the initial verification according to our own methodology, and we have so far verified 1,114 fatalities, and our own indication it's about 65% being women and children. So that gives you already quite a good indication of the type of questions that would have to be asked if you look at the application of IHL in these circumstances. Look, next week's high-level meeting in Geneva. I mean, it was extremely important for us, taking advantage of the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, for us to look to the future, for us, especially when we have such geopolitical tensions, when we have such a polarized both society within countries, but also at the geopolitical level, to actually recall that there is something that was developed, like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that had a vision for the future of humanity, and is not just a nicely written document, but it is law, and it has given birth to hard law that are state obligations. And as a result, we had a whole 1 year preparation at national level with different stakeholders, with businesses, with civil society, with member states, with governments at both national and regional level to look into what are the successes, what are the achievements, but what are also the failures, and what lessons do we learn from it. The event itself, we have tried to innovate it. We didn't go into the usual plenary type meetings. We wanted an interactive dialogue, including by heads of government, heads of state, foreign ministers and so forth. And we hope that it will not, I mean, we have asked them not to be scripted, to actually share with us their thinking, because we do think that the political leadership of the world needs to not only live and breathe human rights, but also needs to make sure that the centrality of human rights is understood. So that's what our expectation is, that we would first of all see a lot of pledges, and we have now an indication that over 100 countries, probably even more as we speak. I mean, we keep getting more and more pledges. Pledges meaning commitments to the human rights cause with hopefully transformational changes that come with it, that we would get a huge collection of commitments from member states, from civil society, from businesses. And so there's a lot, a huge, we will hopefully harvest a very rich material of commitments on the human rights front. We will hopefully also have very important discussions at different levels that point to the future, that are a deep reflection moment, but also make sure that the strengthening of the human rights pillar is going to be part also of the Summit of the Future next year. Because we know that there's going to be a big Summit of the Future in New York. Human rights has to be central to it in all its aspects, and I hope we have a clarion call coming out of this meeting for that purpose. As I said, I mean, I think it is absolutely clear when sexual violence happens, by whoever, by wherever, these are very, very serious allegations, and they need to be investigated, they need to be properly documented, and justice must be served for the victims. We don't have, I mean, as I said, I even asked Israel to allow us to send a team. I hope it will be possible at some stage, but all the, you need to go into quite some detailed examination of whether it's premeditated, whether it was widespread, systematic. I mean, this, I'm not in a position to confirm this, but obviously we take the allegations extremely seriously, and I can tell you, we don't lose time on such things, and we will find other ways and means to talk to whoever we need to talk to in order to to find more of what can be done, because absolutely justice has to be served for the victims.
High Commissioner, if I can take one last question from FA, Isabella.
Thank you very much. I have two questions, but finally I will ask you a different one on Gaza. What is really the influence that you feel you have on the Israeli government to help to stop this war? What kind of lines do you have with them? What kind of lines do you have with Hamas too? And we have seen some of your colleagues, UN colleagues, high officials, visiting, having been in Gaza, and you have not been able to visit Gaza. Why you couldn't go there in any means by Egypt? And how do you see the end of this conflict? Thank you.
So I have asked to go to both Israel, to the occupied Palestinian territory, Gaza, and the West Bank, but so far I have not received a response. I hope it is still possible. So you cannot just go into Gaza. You need the authorization from all the parties. So that's why it is. So that's how it is. I hope that we have influence over both parties in the way that we both intervene with them behind closed doors, but also in the way that we talk about and advocate about what we are seeing publicly. I cannot give you a measure of whether that has led to this, that, or the other, but one thing I can say, I think we can say that in some public discussions, it was becoming clearer that there are very serious concerns from an IHL and International Human Rights Law perspective, and I think it has helped influence some of the discussions in the public in a number of countries that have influence over Israel. And I should say, of course, Israel is the occupying power for the OPT, so they can decide who enters and who doesn't enter. So I depend on their authorization for it. How do I see the end of it? I think one thing is very clear: it cannot go back to what it was. It's clear that, and I've said it at the March Human Rights Council meeting very, very clearly, that the only way out of the situation is to end the occupation and to find a political solution that has been on the table for decades, which is the two-state solution. There's no other way around it. You cannot. If I don't know what else needs to happen to actually come to that conclusion, and I think that's absolutely critical, that we do think about the day after and how to get there, and that we work with both Palestinians and the Israelis who want a future, a peaceful future for both. And I have met them. I have met Palestinians and Israelis who are you're not hearing their voices, but who actually believe in peace and who want to make it happen. And I hope that they will be much stronger in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner. I've just received information about next week's event from Liz over there. 120 states will be pledging in person at last count. The figure keeps changing, as the High Commissioner was saying. We've received 48 pledges also from civil society organizations, 17 from national human rights institutions, 11 pledges by UN entities and international intergovernmental organizations, and we've received another 52 pre-recorded videos with pledging messages, including 8 by heads of state and government and 8 by ministers of foreign affairs. So we really look forward to seeing you next week at the high-level event. Thanks very much.
Recording stopped.